So first of all, I would like to thank David Brear for coming on this podcast. So thank you very much. And I hope it's okay to start off with a 1 minute silence for the Queen. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
Um, yes. So thank you for being on the show again, and I would like to start off by asking you to introduce yourself to the audience who do not know about 11FS. So could you do that?
Yeah, no worries at all. So my name is David Brear. I'm the CEO here at a little company called 11FS. 11FS, if you don't know us, over the last 6.5 years, we have gone about trying to change the fabric of financial services. We really believe that there is a very different way in order to serve consumers, and that actually financial services has become a little bit stale. There is billions and billions of pounds being spent digitizing organizations, but digital is something fundamentally different to that. We've operated in pretty much every geo at this stage, building out greenfield propositions for organizations in Hong Kong and Singapore, the UK, the US, Saudi Arabia, all around the world. And it's been a lot of fun. Like that sort of shift from digitized to digital brings about really amazing opportunities for organizations to serve their customers in a fundamentally different way. And we think that's a whole heap of fun to get involved in.
So I would love to ask you, what inspired you to start this business? So I read that you started off having a chat at Starbucks. And so I'd love to hear, so what sort of inspired you? What made you want to found a business and go through all of the challenges and heaps and loops through to found one, because it doesn't sound very easy. It sounds to be very challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish it was easy. That would, although if it was easy, everybody would have done it, as I always say, right? So, um, why start a business in the first place? I mean, it's a funny one. I mean, I worked. It's strange how many times when your aim is to get to something, but when you get there, it's not exactly what you expected it to be. My background, I ran, big transformation for a big bank and similar for a big insurance company, a big offshoring organization, and last before starting 11FS, a large management consultancy company. And having sort of worked for 12, 13 years of my life to get to that point and have a highly paid job doing things that I thought was what I would really want to do, then actually I realized it just wasn't changing the industry. It was making an organization successful, but it wasn't really achieving the outcome that I really get out of bed for. This isn't about money for me. It's about the impact you can drive on the organization in that sense. So yeah, it was a funny one. I remember sitting there at the job that I had, having worked there all my working life to get there, and talking to my wife and talking to my mum at the time, and saying, do you know what? I think I'm going to quit. Like I think I can do this. I think I can go and make something that does this in a better way. And I think actually, with everything that's happening globally, there is a kind of a window of opportunity, really, that if I'm, brave enough to go and take it, or stupid enough to go and try and take it, then, maybe we can do this. But the critical thing for me, and I did quit and I did leave that job. The critical thing for me was not the sort of thesis with 11FS is, the founders of the business, Jason Bates, who's one of the is my deputy CEO, is co-founder here at 11FS. He also founded Monzo, also founded Starling, has had a fantastic career doing things within and outside of financial services. There's no way I could have done this on my own, without him or without Ross Methvin, who I've known for 15 years of my life. These are friends who actually I've got so much respect for what it is that they do and the way that they do it, that actually you need great co-founders in order to make this journey sustainable. Anybody who thinks being an entrepreneur is, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, standing up and giving a keynote and then not worrying about anything else. This stuff is hard, like, and actually, particularly I think as a CEO, the trials and tribulations of being a CEO is difficult. I mean, you are the chief firefighter for the organization, whether it is the, standing up and taking the brunt of something, or whether it's the communications that you need to do, or, you really being the brunt of the impact of anything, dealing with legal issues, dealing with people issues, dealing with all of these things. But for me, I'm really I think I'm a weird guy in that sense. I actually love the journey and where we're on. I'm proud that we've come a really long way in the 6.5 years we've been operating, and I've loved every single day of it. Even the really hard days, even the ones where we lose something or there's something difficult to deal with. I would I throw back to the job that I had and the salary and everything that came with it, and I a million times rather be doing what I'm doing than doing that. So it's a funny one.
And that ended on a perfect note onto my next question, actually. So I really want to ask, because a lot of people have this image, right, that CEOs and founders are these, I mean, they are incredible people, but they don't have that many failures. So I really want to ask you about some of the failures you've had to overcome, and maybe how that could inspire potential founders, by hearing somebody like you who's gone through challenges.
Yeah, for sure. I think uh, I think I have so little failures because I don't consider things failure. Like, actually, from my perspective, you deal with like issues every day, and I've made bad decisions. I mean, I've made probably a bunch of bad decisions today. Do you know what I mean? But that's down to the your ability to bounce back from those things, and whether myself and Jason was talking about this last week, actually, was, I think the right types of people who run businesses never get too high when things are amazing, but equally don't get too low when things are not great. Actually, the constant drumbeat of business as well is that you get very little time to sit back and be, proud of what you've done, because there's always the next thing, there's always the next challenge, there's always the next quarter, there's always the thing you've got to build, or the thing you've got to convince, or the people you've got to convince to join the business, the people you've got to convince to work with the business, like all of these things. So I think if you were the type of person who, took those things too personally, I think it would be a really difficult thing to do. Um, but equally, I've seen friends who've started businesses. The CEO job is a very lonely job if you don't have the right support structure around you. Um, and I've been uh, both lucky and worked incredibly hard to ensure that 11F has an amazing management team, whether it's our, Joe, our CFO, or, my chief of staff, Zoe, or, Mariette, our CMO. We have a phenomenal group of people who are here to deliver this thing together. Don't get me wrong, we're not a family in that sense, but we are a team. We are a sports team, a really high functioning group of people who have a commitment to each other in order to push those things forward. So yeah, definitely being an entrepreneur is not a simple journey in that sense. But actually, if you're the type of person who loves to deal with problems and loves to kind of overcome adversity, then it really sort of scratches that itch.
Okay, so that's great, to hear that actually about um it's not about sort of it's about the mindset, right? So I really like that answer, right? It's about the mindset, and the about how to sort of take everything as a learning experience. So that's a phenomenal answer. And I think I've also in my sort of career started to realize that a bit. So I would like to ask one last question, on this theme, which is, so there's a lot of competition these days, right? For young people who've just graduated, you graduate with a first, it's nothing these days, right? It's like they're like 1,000, 10,000 people. I mean, you just go in to the market, and people don't care. You've got a first. Well, we've got 100 other people with a first. We've got 1,000 with masters. So what I really want to ask is, for young people out there, it took me, for example, 1.5 year to get a job. And I was a top performing student. So I just want to ask, what are the sort of skills that you think young people should aim for that can potentially differentiate them to get jobs, and start careers, and then potentially make a positive impact?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, bizarrely, uh, the world has got pretty good at figuring this stuff out. I think um, and I mean that not just in the sense of like the hiring process for organizations, but social media is really giving us a good instinct into how do you create differentiation? How do you gain attention when there's a plethora of people out there trying to do that? What is unique about you? I've always really struggled in environments where they uniform you. Literally, at school, putting a uniform on was like the worst thing in the world. But like Cub Scouts as well, like anything where I feel like I'm being contained in a box is the places where I sort of rebel most in that sense. But actually, in the world of work, trying to find out what's your opinion. I think in a world that we live in where there's so much content out there and you can consume so many things to formulate an opinion, not just regurgitate what other people have said, but to truly understand something, to formulate a radical or a provocative opinion on these things. I think is really critical to do that because I mean they all sort of say if you stand for nothing, right? Yeah, so actually if you become an individual who has a strongly held opinion about something, then actually but you are also willing to listen to other people, as well as new information to alter that opinion, then I think you'll find it's much more of a magnetic skill set when it comes to personality in order to really differentiate yourself in the interview process. I mean, a weird story about my first interview process when I was interviewing for a big insurance company. Coming out, I got a double first, and that was great. And went into the world of work, and I bought myself a nice suit, and I had a nice tie, and that was great. And I turned up on time, and I got to the thing, and that was great. And I immediately spilt my drink, which was not good. Um, so immediately I kind of gave up, if I'm honest with you. I stopped all of the pretense of the person that I thought they were looking for, and sort of gave up and was just me. And I kind of found that's what people are looking for. They're looking for somebody who brings some element of personality to what they're doing. That's not cracking jokes and laying traps type thing. It's like, but just being comfortable talking and being yourself. I think in many industries, people try and put on a mask of confidence, or a mask of what a good graduate needs to be, or what a good executive needs to be, or whatever. But actually you find as you grow and you get more experience that really the more you bring to what you're doing, the more comfortable you will be doing it, and then actually the more productive you're going to be as an individual in that sense as well. So I would give everybody the advice of strongly held opinion, be the newest you can be, and find a workplace that actually wants that. Because if you have to go to work pretending to be somebody else every day, it's going to be really, really tiring.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I, I I totally agree with that advice. Now I'm going to move on, in this interview, to more sort of not very specific, but slightly specific financial services questions. So I know that you guys have some amazing technology at 11FS, and you're implementing new technologies like Kubernetes, etc. And so I'm currently, for example, working at a major bank, and helping them sort of migrate towards using newer methods. So I see this gigantic I mean, these are such gigantic institutions, right? And they have, I mean, they have so many different applications. They have so much stuff going on. And so, how do you think, one, uh, these major banks can apply these new technologies and methodologies? And two, do you think that uh, they can successfully compete with challenger banks that are sort of coming up? So,
Yeah, man, that's a big. How long have we got? Because that's the whole thing in terms
yeah,
of banks. Because I mean, essentially, yeah, I mean, stuff like Kafka, Kubernetes, like containerization more broadly. Like, actually, what is it trying to do? What are you trying to do with that? And actually, if you take into account, microservices architecture, or continuous testing, continuous integration, all of these things, like, why do organizations put those things in place? It's not for the sake of it. It's because of the facilitation that it brings about to allow people to either work concurrently or to increase your speed to market.
yes,
And actually, when you look at big organizations, that's not what they're optimizing for. It's kind of like Conway's law. Conway's law is very much about, your communications represent the structure of your organization. And actually, if you sort of take that to a certain degree when it comes to technology, well, actually, your technology and your operating capability, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, right? So if you've got monolithic technology structures, you're going to end up with command and control, uh, you know, large teams. But actually, well, why do people want to work together and disseminate decision making to the edges for small teams of people? Well, because that means they can make things happen and move quickly, which inevitably leads to them doing, microservices, more, service sides or service led architecture in that sense. So I think it's kind of, what are you optimizing for in that sense? I'm a massive believer right now, and I say this to any banking executive that I talk to, is they're basically just making it up. Like, actually, the world is changing quicker than anybody could ever believe that it could do. The marketplace is more complex and chaotic than it ever has been in the past. Therefore, their ability to predict and do a big strategy to know where they're going to be in the next 3 years is impossible. Like, I'm pretty good at this stuff, and I don't think I can tell where we're going to be in the next 3 years, because new competitors, new customer requirements, global pandemics, like, all of these things are happening that are fundamentally changing what the marketplace looks like, right? So anything you can think is a good idea, if it takes you 2 years to deliver, that opportunity is going to be disappeared and somebody else is going to have it before you get there. And all of that for me is meaning that organizations need to bias less towards strategy and more towards execution. And that execution then takes you down the route of, well, Kubernetes, Kafka, microservices, 60 releases a day, not 6 releases a year. Like, this is where you want to get to, because if you can see an opportunity that is available in the market, well, then you want to be the fastest to market to put it into the hands of customers with the lowest cost of change, right? And if you can do it in an atomized way, in the way in which microservices architecture allows you to do, you can truly understand the impact of the action that you're taking. So, with all of that said, like, greenfield, let's get around a whiteboard, let's determine what the new architecture is for this gigantic bank. Um, Getting from brownfield technology estate with 50 different monoliths for 15 different countries and 7 different business units, like, to this utopian greenfield diagram, it's kind of hard, right? And really, what we're talking about is, it's not hard because the technology makes it hard, because you can drop in an event stream ESB system and slowly get rid of things, and rationalize KYC or payment providers and all these different things, and that's all good. So technologically, we have the ability. This is a cultural problem. This is a way it's done. This is it takes 200 people to do something that a startup can do in 10 with 10 people problem. And actually, how do you solve that is hard. Like, cultural change at real significant scale is a really, really, really difficult thing to do. And this is why most organizations, if you look at any bank, any big bank on the planet, they have no longer have one strategy. They have four or five. They have the strategy that is inching the mothership across the page, trying to adhere to regulation and make some changes and optimize their revenue and their profit for today and tomorrow. And they'll generally have a portfolio strategy outside of that, looking at building a brand new, challenger, or building a portfolio of investment opportunities. And why are they doing that? Really, because with work that we've done, something like Mox with Standard Chartered in Hong Kong, or Metal with NatWest in the UK, um, those things are not really about having an SME bank or having a retail bank. They're about an organization learning that a fundamentally different way of approaching those things, with different types of talent, with different types of culture, with different types of technology, leads to a exponentially better outcome. And once you have that understanding in your organization, you stand back and people go like, not only like that's awesome, but like, how the hell did you do that? Then actually it's about infecting the rest of the organization with the thinking that happens in those senses. So the strategies are changed within organizations, and this is great. It is a beautiful thing to see when you start seeing a big organization learn the tricks, the techniques of startups, and be able to apply them against gigantic organizational pieces. But the first thing that they have to say is that doing the same thing over and over again is only going to get us to the same outcome that we've got to before.
That is absolutely fantastic, because I am literally coming up with a strategy, and
Just did
literally
it for you. There you go.
the, and the and there's quite a lot of resistance to the latest methods that sort of significantly decrease the time for different releases, etc. So it's so on point, right? Because you kind of have to really go out of your way to convince them, this is the sort of strategy that we should be implementing, and you've just convinced me that I should double down on it as much as I possibly can.
Well, it's always good. Convincing is always listening. So like understanding what their objections are, because actually, if their objection is it's too risky, well, it's like, well, actually, it's less risky. Like if we atomize change and make small changes and have the ability and the capability to roll back those changes within an hour, then actually, how is it more risky? Uh, if we have automated testing capability across the organization, that means 17 different people could be writing code into the same system and deploying it. How is that more risky? Like, that's less risky, right, than it is a long drawn out waterfall testing process. So I think it's people have to say these things for a really good reason. And actually the frame of reference that they've got is usually the way in which things are done, not the way in which things could be done if you optimize them. So having worked in a big bank for a bunch of years, it's like the best way to overcome skepticism is usually empathy for really what problem is that they're actually bringing up. We've tried this before and it didn't work, or it's really difficult, or that won't happen here, or like a bunch of other reasons that they can kind of give, right? But letting people have their say, and really listening to those objections, and like truly listening to those objections to be able to help them overcome them. I mean, look, every bank on the planet has tried to deploy agile at some element of scale, right? But equally, in the middle of a messy project, people default to what they know, right? So it's why everybody carries an agile book in the first 3 months of the program, and then 6 months in, suddenly Gantt charts are coming out, and it's gone back to waterfall because some executive got scared somewhere and demanded that actually they do what they know. So it's this is people. Like, if your people do the right thing every day, these things will be successful. But people can get it wrong in that sense as well.
That is fantastic advice, and I I do try to listen as much as I can. So hopefully I will manage to convince them. So there are quite a few new technologies that are coming out. There's so many buzzwords. Blockchain, AI, and CBDCs are some of the really well-known sort of buzzwords that are out in the market. But I, for example, am very interested in blockchain technology, but I would love to hear um, if you have, I'm not certain, but do you have any practical examples of it where it has helped a client rather than sort of, I mean, it's immutable, it's atomic, etc., right? Like, do you have any sort of practical examples how it's helping shape the industry or making a positive impact for consumers?
Yeah, I'd say like anything really, technology for me, and any specific technology, whether it's again microservices architecture, or the movement from an open banking perspective, or distributed ledger technology, as you say, I think they're all tools in a toolbox, and actually knowing where to use what is part of the challenge, really, in that sense. I think there are a lot of people, particularly with blockchain and distributed ledger technology more broadly, that are a little less rational, should we say, in terms of the usage of it, just because they're such advocates of a decentralized world, really. Many of the biggest movements for this have come off the back of people's want, you know, to really destabilize central banking in the way in which it operates, and therefore, have a much more decentralized structure around ownership and currency and everything that goes with that. Um, that said, I mean, some of the implementations that you're seeing now around NFTs are super interesting, because actually, when it comes to proving of ownership, either of physical assets or digital assets, then actually that is a real problem that we face into every day, and it costs millions and millions and millions of pounds for people who are losing out with those things. Equally, I'd say from a distributed ledger perspective, some of the best implementations that I've seen over the last couple of years are really about identity. I really think this is the next stage that actually governments and regulators and central organizations will be pushing much more towards, because actually, while sometimes DLT can be a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, then actually, if you're looking for something that can give specific access, that can be queried, that doesn't expose all of the data in that sense, and fundamentally that can be revoked without any trace of that data being left behind, then actually a distributed ledger is a very effective way of delivering those things. Equally, many of the instances where people are talking about blockchain, that a good database would actually solve that problem as well. So it really comes back to what I was saying earlier on, which is, whether it's AI or blockchain or whatever, then not over engineering the solution, and focusing more on the solution that you're providing to the customer than the fixation on the technology itself in that sense.
Um, okay, very interesting. In terms of challenges, right? So we've discussed sort of the challenges of the major banks, right? That they're sort of having culture issues. They want to go back to waterfall, etc. But um, people rarely discuss the challenges of challenger banks. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on what their impediments are, and what are the challenges they're, for example, facing, right? Scaling is probably going to be a major factor. I don't know much, but monetization. So, are they able to monetize their consumers to the point that major banks are, etc.? So, could you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma, right? Will the big incumbent organizations get innovation before the startups scale effectively? And actually, absolutely, the startups are facing all different types of troubles, really, in that sense. But scaling from a customer perspective is one problem, but actually, if you provide a solution, and you're even remotely good at spending above the line from a marketing perspective, you can acquire customers these days, right? It used to be that the thing stopping you competing was the regulatory one, but globally now the regulators are much more pro startup than they were pro-incumbent in that sense. Not that they're not pro-incumbent, but actually they're not keeping the walls up anymore. They're actually very much in the way that the FCA in the UK really spurred. They're creating competition rather than stopping it in that sense. So I think the challenge really for the startups is being really clear about who they are and why they are, and actually ensuring that actually that isn't a purely an ideological view of actually where they want to get financial services to, which prohibits them actually making money. You know, at the end of the day, these businesses have to make money from their customers or with their customers. And the challenge, I think, for many of the challenger banks is that they, from a more of an ideological perspective, have created almost um, a bit of a difficulty for themselves with regards to, making money from or lending or overdrafts or these things, because essentially that's where 99% of the revenue of retail banking is being made from. So how can people do that? Well, what's the services that they can monetize? What's the process that they can do? And how can they actually hire in people into their organizations that deeply understand that? I think we absolutely are seeing a growing up, I think, of the global challenger banking market, where many more people who have an insane amount of experience from big organizations have gone into those companies to help them grow up a little bit. And I don't think that's just growing up from are we doing the checks and balances from a regulatory perspective, but really, are we thinking about the market in a way that actually, as noble as the cause is, are they actually going to be able to survive and make the revenue and the profitability that they need to really justify the valuations and the scale of investment that's actually been placed in them? So I think it's an interesting challenge, but I mean, I think we all forget, because I mean, none of us were born, but HSBC and Lloyd's Banking Group and all these companies are 300 years old. Like, they didn't start with four different divisions and 15 different products in each of them, and all of the different business models they did. They did something amazingly well that resonated with their consumers, that allowed them to have the opportunity to solve more problems for people. It's just in 300 years they got carried away, and now they're the absolute juggernauts that they are today. So startups go through different periods. They go through a sense of scale up and maturity, and I think for many of the big challenger banks, the Revoluts, the Monzos, the Starlings, the Nubanks, the Chimes, I think we're in a point of maturity that we'll start seeing us pivot much more into profitability as well.
Oh, wow. So that's amazing. That's really amazing to hear, actually, that they're slowly moving towards profitability in such a I said slowly, but in such a short time span. That's really, really amazing. So, um, yeah, now I'd like to ask about I'll slightly be venturing off from this slowly, but I wanted to ask, do you think there will be any geopolitical impacts on the banking sector? So one is obviously I'm not going to mention any countries, but there's an increase in wars, and there's also an increase in, for example, uh, countries seeking to trade without sort of reserve currencies or popular currencies. Will that have an impact on the United Kingdom financial services sector and um, potentially the American and European financial services sectors?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is a funny old world right now, right? We, as you say, geopolitical problems. The Ukraine war. We've got a global downturn of an economy. We've got cost of living crisis across the entirety of the world. We've got housing costs spiraling. There is a very odd concoction of forces in the market in that sense. I think the challenge really is, I mean, we've got a generation of people now who have never seen an interest rate. It's kind of bizarre, like on savings. It's like that's like a new thing that's happening in the market right now, because people have never seen those things. Interest rates haven't been at this place. So I think actually the opportunity to educate and serve markets in a very different way really are presenting themselves for people. We say this a lot. It's like through a really odd number, from 2008, but even before then, we've seen an odd set of circumstances that have led to the financial services industry really being a product industry. It was selling pretty heavily commoditized products. I think the fintech movement is a services movement. It's the experience of owning and being a customer of that thing in the same way as it is the difference between being a customer of Spotify or being a customer of another streaming platform feels very different from the experience that you were buying a CD or buying some vinyl. So that rise of the services industry in that sense, and that's both in terms of the embedded capability that can come with that. Look at Klarna, look at PayPal. Like these are services that have been embedded at the point of the problem that are really have done so amazingly well in terms of their ability to penetrate the market and scale. So for me, I think this rise of services over the next couple of years means it puts both upward pressure on organizations to be relevant to their customers, but I think it puts downward pressure on big organizations as well in order to make sure that actually their back office is incredibly efficient. Anywhere where people start differentiating further up the stack. Other industries, that's always been pretty bad for players that cannot avoid commoditization in that sense in terms of what they're doing. If you look at the mobile network operators as a good example, then nobody really cares what logo's in the top of your iPhone anymore. It's just the fact that you've got an iPhone, right? So and actually all of the opportunities to serve customers go away, but actually the scale of profitability that they've been used to does as well. So I think in this market, particularly where things are happening that people from a generational perspective haven't seen before, I think organizations that provide services that fundamentally help them navigate these waters are going to be the ones that are most successful on the other end of this, which both gives a real, if you're listening to this and you're at a big bank right now, this gives you a real opportunity, but equally it gives you a massive threat as well. And really, they're the best type of opportunities because they're the type that you don't have to spend a bunch of time convincing people that something should or shouldn't happen. It becomes so blatantly obvious that you've got to do something. And that something gives you a great opportunity to really change how that organization functions.
Interesting. So now this is the last sort of section of the interview, and here you don't have to answer the question. So I'm going to venture into more about sort of what your views are on, for example, so there's a lot of social anxiety, right? I want to explain why I'm asking this question. And um, a lot of people, as we've just talked about a bit, is that, for example, there's a cost of living crisis, hybrid competition after graduation. And so there's a lot of social anxiety. And I wanted to ask you, I also at the same time feel like, at least my experience at university has been like there's been a death of spirituality. And I wanted to ask you, do you believe that spirituality has a role, or meditation, or some form of oneness with nature, whatever you want to call it, has a role to play in this I because of this tribulation, or do you think it doesn't have a role to play?
I think I'm. It's an interesting one because I'm not particularly spiritual. I'm not, and I'm not particularly religious, really, in that sense. So actually, but I am conscious of my motivations and my brain being at odds with each other quite frequently. And actually the ability to center yourself, to focus yourself in order to achieve the things that you need to do, particularly if you're starting and running a business, your ability to really knuckle down and really focus for the long haul and sustain periods of significant effort really only comes from you being able to build your own personal rituals and rhythms to actually make sure you're getting the best out of yourself in that sense. So, all of that sounds like I'm super spiritual in that sense because I'll take the first 10 minutes of the day to think about what is the most important thing that I need to achieve for that day in order to move the business forward. And actually, then I'll just make sure that my diary is aligned to that thing. And it's little things like that that we can be lost in being so busy to wonder whether the thing that we're actually doing is really materially moving either you as an individual in your career or your organization that you're representing or building towards or away from the objective that you're setting yourself. And I think it's little things like that that I think actually you know allow you to spend the time to be grateful for how far you've come, but also not lose focus for the things that in order to be successful that you've still got to surmount in terms of the next chapter of whatever it is. And it really goes back, as I said earlier on, is like I try not to get too excited about the things that we have achieved, and I try not to get too disappointed about the things that I wanted to happen that don't. And actually, if you can always find that good middle ground, then you'll find are probably going to be a lot more centered, a lot more grounded than other people in that sense. I should say so much of that comes down to the parenting that I had, and I was absolutely, really lucky to have a mum and a dad who, gave me that footing in terms of those foundations. But equally, I think it's something that if the thing that you want to achieve is beneficial enough to you as an individual, then actually anybody can learn those little tricks to make sure that actually not only do you say you want to do it, but you get up every morning and make sure that you do.
Oh wow, wonderful. Wonderful answer. And so now I'd like to ask a bit about sort of I see there's social media has become very contentious now. And there are major sort of, as I said, you don't have to answer this question, but there are major controversies nowadays where people believe that there's social media bans, etc. Equally, people also believe, some other folks believe that companies have written agreements, and if you don't follow those agreements, people should be allowed you to not utilize their products or services. So you don't have to answer this question, but yeah, because I know it's very contentious. But what are your views or opinions on this?
I think it's an interesting one. I mean, on social particularly, like does Twitter have a responsibility to ensure that the things that people are saying on Twitter are right? I don't know. I mean, the internet's been around for a long time. Every forum I've ever been into, somebody is saying something crazy, right? The challenge is that if that person who's saying something, so happens to be the president of the United States, then actually the impact of the craziness, rather than it just being somebody having a really outlandish view of like Star Wars or whatever, then you've got to kind of be really careful about the potential influence of social media in that sense. We're talking about fundamentally changing the outcomes of democracy, which is a really difficult thing to send. But equally, it is a slippy slide to jump into to start getting social media people, social media companies censoring what can and can't be said, and having a sense of moral compass or moral obligation around what is right and what is wrong. That's quite a scary place as well, because actually, while freedom of speech, applies to everybody, where we start censoring a lot of people to do things in that sense, that's quite worrying. But I think the thing on this that I think we all need to kind of focus on it really, and this isn't just about like celebrities saying crazy things or whatever, but actually on a day to day basis, the mentality of a lot of individuals is a vying for attention, in a real sense. Um, and actually, people kind of I've always sort of focused, and I mean, I put something on LinkedIn earlier on today about this, which was I've always kind of focused on trying to gain attention for the things that are done good, you know. So do something well, build a business, talk about a thing, have a point of view, talk about that. So there's the opportunity to be excellent at something and then talk about it, but actually that's quite hard work, right? A lot of people have chosen a path of being either infamous, so doing something wrong and trying to gain attention for in a negative reinforcement sense, or fundamentally being a victim of some sense, and therefore gaining attention through sort of the virtuous nature of being a victim of some description. And I think all of that leads from the first one is incredibly difficult to do. Like actually, being in a situation where you do something successful and try and pass on that knowledge or that experience to other people. Oh yeah, that's a long road and it's very tiring. So the second one and the third one are, incredibly uh, there's a lot of pull towards that being an attractive route in order to gain attention in that space. But really, I think I would just go back to what we were saying earlier on, which is like, fundamentally, it's better to be somebody trying to help change the world than it is somebody trying to pull it down. And I think if you focus on building something great rather than tearing down things that other people have done, you'll probably be a lot happier person in the long run as well.
Wow, fantastic answer. That was really, you didn't specifically give an answer, but you did give very good pros and cons, and I really like that because I am of a very similar sort of view. Like, yeah, I find, yeah, very, very similar point of view to you. So this is my last question
Mhm.
before we wrap it up, and I know this is going to be a massive cliche, uh, but it's way less controversial. So I wanted to ask you, to you, what do you think is the purpose of life?
I think the purpose of life is to leave it better than you found it. Like, I think fundamentally, I think we've all got an obligation to be a good person, I think actually when all is said and done and everything goes dark, I think you want to leave people with a feeling of you having materially made things better. And that isn't about, some people make things better in gigantic ways, which is, they've conquered mountains or they've discovered lands or they've invented things, all of these things. For me, I think actually everybody can do their bit to make the world a better place, and that sounds very hippie-ish. But actually, I think that's almost our responsibility. It's being good to other people. It's being good to the environment we live in. It's being good to the family that you have. It's being good to the friends that you want. I think actually, while I'm not a religious person, I do in a weird way believe in karma, and I think the more good you do, the better everything is in that sense. So, yeah, for me, leave the place in a better place than you found it. And if everybody did that, we'd be in a lot better place.
That is a fantastic answer, David. Thank you so much, and I'm very grateful and thankful to have you on the show, and I hope to maybe have you on one day again. It was a lovely conversation. Yeah, and maybe even meet you in person one day. So fantastic, David. So yeah, maybe we'll meet again, and thank you. So we'll chat again then one day.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for having me on.